Much, David. Our next speaker is Gail Pooley. He is the Associate Professor of Economics at BYU. He has taught at Al Faisal University in Riyadh, also at BYU Idaho, Boise State University, and the College of Idaho. He serves on the board of humanprogress.org. It was a true pleasure to work with him on a paper which we published late last year. And what I asked Gail to do this morning is to explain the main components of our research and to appraise the audience with the latest numbers pertaining to the Simon Abundance Index. With that, help me welcome Gail Pooley.
Well, thank you all very much for being with us today. Thank you, Cato, for sponsoring this event. And I also want to thank the internet, especially Twitter. Without Twitter, I would have never discovered Marion. So God bless the internet. I'm especially grateful also for the opportunity to meet David Simon. David, your father was a great inspiration to all of us. Professor Simon had the facts and this beautiful theory. But he had something much more important. He had the courage to stand up to anyone, anywhere, to defend his facts and his arguments. He was a true David surrounded by Goliaths. So thank you, David, for being with us this morning. None of us would be here without the courage of your father to speak the truth. In the last Avengers movie, Thanos says, "The universe is finite. Its resources finite. If life is left unchecked, life will cease to exist. It needs correcting." Any idea where Thanos got his inspiration?
Oh, it looks like it.
Society needs rescaling. We've got to reduce the size of the entire human enterprise. Well, the Guardians of the Galaxy show up. These two men agreed on one thing, that there is a relationship between population and prices. Ehrlich argued that as population increased, prices would increase, resulting in scarcity. Julian argued the opposite, that as population increases, prices would actually decrease. So who was right? Well, fortunately, they bet. Behold, one of the most important checks ever written in economics. Of the 5 metals Ehrlich chose, copper, chromium, nickel, tin, and tungsten, the real price had fallen over 10 years by over 57%. So our project begins by asking this question: would Julian still win that bet today? So first of all, we thought he was too generous in his bet. We thought his odds were too good. If you remember, he had an unlimited downside and only a limited upside. We also think that using real prices maybe underestimated what was truly happening. We think that he should have used time prices instead.
What prices?
Time prices. Time prices. Convert prices to time. That's where the real measurement is. And we also, we'll give George a reference here about how important time is when we measure abundance. So our paper does 5 things. First of all, we offer a new definition of abundance. Secondly, we take the 5 commodities that were in this bet, we expand it to 50 commodities. We also convert these prices to time prices. We think that's a much better way to measure scarcity. We develop a new equation that we call the price elasticity of population. And we also then offer a new index to measure this abundance. We quantify this definition and we measure it. So abundance. We define abundance as the relationship between prices and population, the same as Julian would, the same as Ehrlich would have. So we begin with these 50 commodities. We call them the foundation commodities. So we have energy, food, materials, metal, and precious metals. We go to the World Bank and the IMF to get this data. We go back to 1980. They fortunately keep a great record. So we begin with their data. And then we also, the next step is we recognize that innovation shows up lots of different places. It shows up in lower prices, but it also shows up in higher incomes. And to really see the full picture, we've got to look at both the change in income and the change in prices. It really allows us to see the whole picture. Adam Smith recognized this when he said, the real price of everything is the toil and trouble of acquiring it. What is bought with money is purchased by labor. George will confirm that. Unlike central bank currencies, time is not subject to inflation. So, a little review here. Money prices are expressed in dollars and cents. Time prices are expressed in hours and minutes. When we look at money prices, there are kind of two prices that we think about, the nominal price and the real price. The real price is simply the nominal price divided by a deflator. Time prices, we just take a price of an item and divide it by hourly income. That allows us to determine how much time it takes to work to acquire that item. Note that time prices can decline two ways. The price can fall or income can increase. If either one of these two things happen, you'll see time prices decline. So we look at prices from the World Bank, and for the denominator for hourly income, we went back to the World Bank and looked at their per capita GDP. With that, we then went to the Conference Board, who publishes annual hours worked, and used that to calculate what the GDP per hour would be. With those variables, we then were able to analyze these 50 commodities. So let's just take a moment and look at oranges, for example, one of the items in our database. So 1980, World Bank reports that a kilo of oranges was about 40 cents. In 2017, they'd more than doubled to 81 cents. During that same period, per capita GDP was a little more than $2,500 per person. It had increased to over $10,000 per person by 2017. The hours worked, note the decline there, about a 9% decline from 2168 down to 1964. If we take the GDP per capita and divide by the hours worked, that will get us a GDP per capita per hour. So $1.16 in 1980, $5.34 in 2017. So with that, we can calculate the time price of oranges. 40 cents divided by $1.16 would suggest about 0.345 hours, or about 21 minutes to buy a kilo of oranges. By 2017, the price had dropped to 9 minutes. So we had a 56% decrease in the cost of oranges. So we take these nominal prices from the World Bank, we divide by the GDP per capita per hour to get the time price, and then we index those to 1980, and then we plot that trend. And we do this with all of the commodities. We also kind of look at a little regression. You'll note that you'll see spikes in that trend line. And Professor Simon said this is what you expect to have happen. You'll have periods where you will have spikes. When those occur, you'll have four things that will happen. People will use less. They will try to find more, discover more, make more. They will also recycle. It's kind of hard to recycle an orange, but you can recycle steel and aluminum and lots of other things. And they will also search for substitutes. Those four things will cause the price to actually end up being lower. And we see that in this trend line as well. A couple of other things that we can do with percentage change that give us a little more insight is we can also develop a multiplier. We can compute the compounded annual growth rate, and we can also calculate the years to double. The multiplier simply says how many units of an item the same amount of time would purchase at different points of time. The equation is 1 divided by 1 plus the percentage change. Note that this relationship is not linear, it's geometric. Once we have the multiplier, we can calculate the compounded annual growth rate. The multiplier raised to 1 over the number of years minus 1 will give you that compounded annual growth rate. Once you have that, you can use the rule of 70s to calculate how many years it takes to double something in size. You can also use logarithms to do that. You can also use a financial calculator or Excel to calculate both the growth rate and the multiplier. So with that, let's go back and take a look at oranges. They dropped by 56%. That would indicate a multiplier of 2.27. So the time it took me in 1980 to earn the money to buy an orange, that same amount of time would get me 2.27 oranges in 2017. At that rate, oranges are compounding at 2.24%, which means every 31 years you get twice as many oranges. So we take all of our commodities, do our analysis on them, get them all indexed to 100 in 1980, put them together, and that's what our trend line looks like. Every one of our commodities actually fell in price of the 50. Zinc, 17.5%, sugar, over 83%. The average was around 64.7%. So we take the whole index, apply it, time price 64.7 would say your multiplier is 2.83. I buy this basket in 1980. For the same amount of time, I get 2.83 times as much in 2017. That's growing at 2.85% a year. Every 25 years, abundance doubles. So the next thing we did is we developed a new equation that we call the price elasticity of population. If you're familiar with these equations from Micro 101, price elasticity of demand and cross price elasticity, there won't be an exam on this. So our equation is price elasticity, or price change, the percentage change in time prices divided by the percentage change in population. Also note that we always assume that population is increasing, so our denominator is always positive. So when we look back at the data, we index both population and our commodities to 100 in 1980. Population grew from about 4.5 billion to over 7.5 billion. We added 3 billion people to the planet, almost a 70% increase in population. During the same 37-year period, prices fell, time prices fell by almost 65%. So when we plug those values into our equation, 64.7, 69.3, we get a coefficient of minus 0.934. The way we interpret this is for every 1% increase in population, abundance increased, time prices fell by 1%. We also discovered there are 4 abundance zones that we can look to from this equation: decreasing abundance, emerging abundance, accelerating abundance, and superabundance. So what I want to ask you to do a little math problem here with me. So in 1980, you invite 100 guests over for dinner. It's going to cost you $10 per guest to buy the food and beverage. What would the cost be? Be $1,000. So in 2017, you have 69% more guests, but your costs have fallen by 65%. What's your bill going to be? Well, I think it's 169 times 350. So your bill's going to be $591.50. Is that right? We see it? Ignore inflation because these are time prices. So just look at this for a second. Your bill is actually 40% less today than it was in 1980. So what is superabundance? One of the 4 categories that we identify as superabundance. Superabundance occurs when no matter how many more people come to dinner, your bill decreases. So the last thing we did was we developed a Simon Abundance Index. We quantify and then measure this degree of abundance where we're recognizing both population and prices. We set the index equal to 100 in 1980. The equation for that is just 1 plus a percentage change in population divided by 1 plus a percentage change in time prices times 100. So population increased by 70%. Prices fell by 65%, so our denominator there is 0.35. We multiply that times 100, we get a value of 479. We can also think about it this way: what's the change in the multiplier times the percentage change, 1 plus a percentage change in population times 100. Our multiplier, remember, 2.83 today relative to 1980. We have 70% more people times 100 would also give us that 479.6. So here's the index from 1980. Yes, there were periods where abundance declined, but look at that overall trend. Continues to move, continues to move. So in summary, 1980, our index was 100. 2017, it had increased to 479, indicating a 379% increase. That suggests that this is growing at about 4.33% a year, and abundance will double every 16 years. So our project, once again, we create a new definition for abundance. We expand it to 50 commodities. Going back to 1980, we convert this data to time prices. We have developed a new equation, the price elasticity of population, and we also offer a new index, the Simon Abundance Index. I actually think that Professor Simon was awarded the Nobel Prize this year. Paul Romer stood in as proxy. An economy grows whenever people take resources and rearrange them in a way that makes them more valuable. Rearranging is freedom. Value is where markets allow you to discover if you've created something of value. Another way to think about it is how many keys are on a piano? I think there's 88. How many songs are in a piano? Well, biologists and politicians like Ehrlich and Thanos would say you should just count the keys. Economists like Julian would say, no, you should listen to the almost infinite variety of imagination that produces music from this device. I would just conclude by saying if Julian were here today, he would tell us to listen to the music. He would say that every human being that's here has gifts and superpowers. And if we have the freedom to create and the liberty to trade with one another, that we can create this astonishing abundance. And we can defeat the darkness of Thanos and his minions. Please join Julian in this new Guardians of the Galaxy. Thank you.
Well, Gail, that was one hell of a talk. Tough act to follow, but I am. Your students are truly blessed to have you.